Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about a lesson plan for teaching the classical structure of argument. Now, as I had said in my video about the classical structure of argument itself, which you should be seeing a link for up above, this is a very, very old approach to argumentation. This goes back. The Greeks sort of set the foundation, but it's really the Romans who codified this. But this is still a common way of building arguments, especially academic arguments. So I think this is really valuable to teach students for that reason. So what I did to teach this, I had students read about this for homework. The textbook that I've assigned this semester at time of filming has a shortish section on the classical structure of argument. So I had students read that, and then I put up on the board the 7 components of it. Exordium, narratio, propositio, partitio, confirmatio, confutatio, and peroratio. See my video about the classical structure for more on those. But I put the 7 elements up on the board, and I had us just quickly define each section of it so that students, again, I don't necessarily care if students know the Latin terms or not, in the way that I don't care if they know the Greek terms for ethos, pathos, and logos, whatever it is, as long as they know the concepts. So we got the concepts down associated with the Latin terms. So the exordium is the attention grabber, the narratio is background and setting the stakes, propositio is the thesis, etc., etc. We talked through all of these things, and we sort of fleshed them out a little bit. Then I said to students, now, if you ignore the Latin terms, this should look pretty familiar. And indeed it did, because in this case, we had happened to do a project immediately before this that used a structure based on the classical structure. But if your students are familiar with how academic arguments tend to be built, they should be able to recognize the links between the classical structure of argument and the way that we tend to teach argumentation today in things like first-year composition classes. So we talked through that and the sort of great benefits of this structure. Then I had students rewatch. I say rewatch because I assigned this clip for homework, whether or not they watch it, as always. But we watched this debate. I'll put a link up above and in the description down below, because I think this one works really, really well. There's a lot of potential debates you could choose for this. This is a debate between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney from the 2012 presidential debates in the U.S. election. And it's about the role of government. Each speaker presents his vision of the role of government. And what I did was I divided the 7 components of the classical structure into 3 different groups. So, exordium, I'm trying to remember all the Latin terms. Exordium, narratio, propositio as the first group, those 3. Then partitio and confirmatio as the second group. And then confutatio and peroratio as the third group. And I divided the class into 3 groups. Or no, sorry. A little more complicated than that. I divided the class in half first. One half took Obama's speech, the other half took Romney's speech. And then within each of those halves, they divided themselves into three groups. One group looking for the first three elements, the second group looking for the second group of elements, and another group looking for the third set of elements. So basically, each small group, I mean, it worked out to about 3 people per group. They were just looking for a couple of elements in these speeches. We watched the speech twice, and then I went through and said, all right, Team Obama, since Obama speaks first in this video, what did you identify as the exordium? What did you identify as narratio? What did you identify as all the way through? And so they pointed us to the elements of these speeches that they saw. And then the Romney group did the same thing. Where did you see this speaker, Mitt Romney, doing each of these elements of the classical structure? And I didn't especially push them very hard on this. Sorry, my eye was itchy. I didn't especially push them very hard on this, in part because they typically identified things that at least debatably were those various elements, so it worked out reasonably well. But then I asked them, okay, which of these two speakers makes a better classically structured argument? So the first sort of large-scale reflection was not who's more persuasive, who do you agree with, who was right, any of those kinds of questions. It was based on the classical structure of argument, these 7 steps for building a good argument, who does a better job and why? And so we got a couple of people to sort of offer their opinions about this, a couple of different perspectives on who was more persuasive and why. And then I did ask them, whose argument did you find more compelling? Who do you think is right here? And that's not necessarily as solid a rhetorical question because it's a content question more so, but if you can connect the reasons that they give for being persuaded one way or another to the practice of rhetoric, this is still potentially a useful teaching tool. So that's the way that I approach teaching the classical structure of argument. We start by defining the various terms based on the homework reading that they had done. Then I divide them into 2 groups. Each group divides themselves into 3 groups, choosing that focus on particular elements of the classical structure. We watch a pair of speeches twice, and then they analyze them. They analyze the speeches both in terms of what they're doing with the classical structure and why these particular speeches might work. We talk about all of these elements throughout.